Hi, and welcome to my channel. My name is Amanda, and we're going to be doing my mid-month wrap-up for November. It is November the 15th right now, so I'm just going to talk about everything I've read from November the 1st until now, and I thought that would be easiest to do if we went and looked at my TBR that I created for the beginning of the month, and then we'll talk about what I've read and what I still have left for the rest of the month. So let's go over to the computer to look at that. So here we are with my November TBR. I didn't have any carryover books. I actually finished all of my October TBR early. I have been putting fewer books on my list, and so I've been finishing them a little bit early. And so I finished all of those. I didn't have any carryover books. I'm still reading Long Overdue at the Lakeside Library. This is my NetGalley book, and it's on Kindle, and I am not enjoying it. Like, I'm only about 4 chapters in. They just got to the original murder, the first murder. I don't know how many there will be, but they just got to the first one, and I'm like, I do not care. So we'll see how it goes, but I'm still reading that a little bit every day on my Kindle. So my plan with these is if there's a video specifically dedicated to that book, then I'm just going to take a couple of seconds to talk about it. But if this is the only place that I'm going to be discussing the book, then I'll talk a little bit more about it. So that is my plan. Now we're at the J.D. Robb books, and if you don't know what's happening, I'm doing what I'm naming a Robb-a-Week. And that means every week I'm going to read a J.D. Robb book, these in-depth books. So I have now read numbers 1, 2, and 3. I'm currently reading Rapture in Death. And here's what I will say. The books are really well written. I like the characters. There is so much sexual assault in these books, and so many remembrances and reliving things that have happened to people in the past that it is difficult for anybody. I think that it's difficult for anybody, but I think there definitely should be trigger warnings if you have that as any kind of issue in your life. I don't know that I would do these books, or figure out maybe where you can skip around, because it's never about the actual crime. It's always about the investigators and the other people that we're inside their heads. They're the ones that have the kind of like flashback issues. So I'm really liking the series because I'm really liking the characters, but there are some hard to read spots. So that is the in-depth books. We are just following along. Her name is Eve Dallas. She's the main character in these books, and she is our main protagonist, and she's a detective. It is set in the United States in the future, in the 2050s, and it's really funny because these were written in the mid-90s, and so the things that she thought in the mid-90s that would be things that would like be a thing in 2050 is just really funny. And one of them is that every time they answer a phone, it's always like FaceTime. So every time they answer their phone, it's always a video screen up. And I just think that's hilarious. I mean, you can turn the video screen off, but I think that's funny because it's what we have right now. I mean, we could do that, but I think it's funny. So, and there are just other things that I'm like they were drinking Pepsi, and she said, I need 2 tubes. And then she said she drank her Pepsi out of a tube. And I was like, I wonder what that looks like in her brain. Like, what is she picturing? So anyway, I just think it's funny that they were written in the mid-90s, and we get to see what she thinks 2050 is going to be like. And that's not very far from where we are right now. Anyway, now we are at the new authors that I read. And these all came from my story graph. And so I had a book with an odd number of pages, and that was The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. And I did finish this. This book was so good at the very beginning. Like, it hooked me, and I just wanted to keep reading. Like, I didn't want to put it down. I wanted to find out what was going to happen. We have a young girl who is orphaned, and she knows, or she thinks the only way out of her situation is to get into this school that she wants to go to. And everybody says, oh, it's impossible. You can't do that. You have to pass this really difficult test. And she ends up convincing this guy to help her study and teach her to do it. And so her teacher helps her, tells her everything that she needs to read, and she passes the test and she gets into the big school. And I'm like, oh, this is great. And so we're starting school, and then everything just kind of fast forwards. And that first year of school is really good too. And then I hit like 40% of the way through this book, 35 to 40%. And it was like everything slowed down, which is weird because an actual war started. But I guess my enjoyment is what slowed down. I mean, it is called the Poppy War. So, I mean, you understand that there's a war, and she just learns things about herself at school, and that she might not be from where she thought she was from, and she might not be who she thought she was. And so that's just a lot of cool stuff as we're figuring out who she is. And then there's just this huge section. I don't know. I didn't like where we were going. I didn't like where she went as a character. And I'm hoping that as I keep going through the series, because I'm going to read book number 2, and I hope that as I keep going, she kind of learns more of who she is and she starts making better choices, because I'm not pleased with the choices that she's making right now. So I did really like it though, especially the beginning half. So the next one, A Book with a Place in the Title, Motherless Brooklyn. I have not read it. I think I'm going to do that on audio because I heard that the audio narrator does a really good job. So that will be coming up. A Book Set in a Different World, The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. I have read this one, and it is part of the 100 Best Fantasy Books, so that will be coming out eventually. I'm not sure what the posting schedule is for that yet, but my thoughts on that will be out. I've also been talking about it in some of the Discord channels, so if you're just dying to know what I think about it, mostly, I thought it was fantastic. When I started, I thought it was going to be like Gardens of the Moon, where everybody talks about how difficult it is to read. And somebody said that that's not exactly the problem with The Eye of the World. The problem with the whole Wheel of Time in general is just that it's so big and it's so long. And so I really liked it. I thought that it was great. And then after I read it, somebody said that Robert Jordan just copied The Fellowship of the Rings. And so I was like, what? So I went back and looked, and I went back and thought about it again, and I was like, well, I mean, I guess so, but I just feel like every epic fantasy has some of those same elements as The Fellowship of the Rings. That's why they're all listed under epic fantasy. So anyway, I really enjoyed it, and I'm definitely going to the next book, and I have more thoughts in the 100 Best Fantasy video. A Book with a Beautiful Cover, I picked The Immortals. I have not read that one yet. A Book Set in a School, Finding Junie Kim. I've not read that. A Book Out of My Comfort Zone, The Love Hypothesis. I've not read that. A Favorite Book of a Friend, The Neverending Story. So this one might end up actually being a carryover. I have a physical copy of this, and you can see I'm right at the beginning because this is part of a book club read. And my book club does not read by the month. We read by the week because we just do weekly check-ins on Voxer, and we only read 1 or 2 chapters a week. So we go at the pace of our slowest reader in the group, and we just have a couple of people who have really busy jobs, and reading is not their first hobby. So they just read when they can and when they want to. And so The Neverending Story might be on my list for a while, but I'm reading it. It is Andrew's favorite book, and I did immediately tell him, like, hey, I started your favorite book, and I'm liking it so far, but I'm only 2 chapters in, and I've seen the movie, so I keep comparing, of course, one thing to the other. Okay, the next one is a sad book, All the Children Are Home. I've not read that. And the next one is a YA book, Clockwork Angel by Cassandra Clare, and I did read that, and I loved it. I was so worried about this because YA books are usually not just what I like. The main characters either seem to be very angsty or they make decisions that I think are dumb, and I'm like, you need to know better than that. Or the authors always try to throw in some kind of love triangle. I absolutely detest love triangles. So I was pleasantly surprised in this book. Actually, my only complaint about this book is that the characters' ages are listed as like 17, 19, 23. I think the oldest one is like 25, and they seem like they're in their late 30s, those people. And then the other ones who are teenagers seem like they're in their mid 20s with the way they act and the things they know and that kind of stuff. So it seemed like it was a YA book in age number only. Otherwise, it read to me just like an adult book, and I loved it. I loved the whole premise of it. I love the idea of it, the world building that she's come up with, like developing this world. Just, I thought it was so unique, and I really liked it. We have demons. I mean, the very first line is something like the demon exploded, and I was like, well, we are right in the action at the very beginning of this book. And so I just loved how Cassandra Clare, this is the first book by her that I've read as well, by the way. And I just loved how her world is so thought out. I mean, you can tell that there are many other beings that we still haven't been introduced to yet, but she's already thought out how they work in the world and what they can do and how that all goes. And so we are just following a girl at the beginning. She gets off of a boat because her brother has sent her a ticket to come from New York to London. This is in the 1800s. And when she gets off the boat, her brother's not there, but there's a lady there or a person there to pick her up and say that they're taking her to her brother. And that's not exactly what happens. And thus begins the adventure. I just loved it, and I cannot wait to get to the next books. I will definitely be reading more in this series. So now, the NPR books. Terror in the City of Champions by Tom Stanton. This was my 2016 pick under the dark side. And so this is a nonfiction book. All three of these books are going to be discussed in my NPR video, so I'm just going to highlight the ones I've read. So, Terror in the City of Champions is a nonfiction book about Detroit in the 1930s, probably late 20s to late 30s, just that decade in there. And it's called the City of Champions because they had a lot of sports championships all in one year. And the terror part is because there was a secret society that was just straight up murdering people for no reason. So that was a very interesting read, and I talk about that quite a bit in the NPR Challenge video. The next one for 2017 was Universal Harvester by John Darnielle. Now, if you read or if you watched my last NPR check-in, the one where I talk about Wolf in White Van, that's also written by John Darnielle. And one thing is, he narrates the audiobooks, and he does a great job. Like, sometimes it worries me when authors of fictional writings do it, because it just seems to be a completely different thing to narrate a book than write a book. And so it worries me. But this is now my second book that I have read by him, and the second audio that I've listened to by him, and he just does a really good job. And again, what he does is just takes a normal everyday thing that everybody has to deal with, and he just twists it a little bit, and we come at it from a completely different angle, and I love it. This book starts out with a boy who works at and it's not a Blockbuster, it's like a small town movie rental place in the 1990s. He lives alone with his dad. He's 19 or 20, he might be 20 or 21, but he lives there with his dad, and he works at this movie store, and a couple of people bring movies back, and they're like, something weird is on this movie. Like, this is it has something weird in it. And so he kind of ignored it at first, and then he went and watched it, and it was literally spliced in to the movie, and it was just a scene. And so he showed it to his boss. Well, one of the people who saw it, she came in and she was like, there's a weird thing on this video. And then she came back in and she's like, did you watch it? Did you watch it? So anyway, that just creates a whole mystery that he and his boss and this random lady who comes into the store starts to explore what might be happening and what's going on. And so it was very enjoyable. It's a pretty short read, and I really liked it. So that was my 2007 Dark Side. I do discuss that a lot more as well in the NPR Challenge video, which will be coming up. And Melmoth, I've not gotten to yet. Then we have the subscriber recommendation book, and that is Practical Magic by Alice Hoffman. I have heard of this book, for sure, but I had no idea what it was about. Like, I really thought that it was witches. Like, I thought it was a big group of witches. I think I must have been confusing that with something else, like another movie or a different book or something. But anyway, it might have some magical elements to it and some witchiness, but ultimately I think it's just a book about family. It is a book about sisters raising sisters raising sisters. I loved the family dynamics in this. We start out with two sisters who have been orphaned, and they move in with their aunts, the aunts. And these two old ladies now are raising these two sisters. I mean, old ladies. I'm not sure how old they are. They seem to almost be immortal by the time this book is over, but these two old ladies raise these two girls. The two girls cannot be more different. And so they choose their own paths as adults, and they go their own way. And between the two of them, one of them has no kids and one of them has two daughters. So we get another set of sisters, and we watch those sisters grow up and everything that they deal with their mom and dad and their aunt, who is in the picture sometimes and sometimes not. And so, and then how they deal with the aunts, the big two, the two older ladies. And so how they all come together to help each other. And I really loved it. I thought that it was just a really good book about family and about living in the dysfunction that everybody has and figuring out a way to still support each other through that and to just be there for your family members. I really loved it. Now we have Klaus's Fantasy Challenge. So these are the ones that I specifically got off the list. I know that The Eye of the World is on the list, but it's further down the list. These are the next three: The Return of the King, Gardens of the Moon, and Best Served Cold. I have already read these two, and there will be a dedicated video for those, but I'll just tell you quickly. Gardens of the Moon I thought was great. I didn't think that there was an issue like understanding what was happening or anything like that. I feel like the main complaint that people have about the Malazan books being difficult is that there are so many characters, and that becomes a problem. But once you get the group straight, like who is who and what group and where they are in the world, then it's generally not difficult to know what's happening. I mean, it's just a ton of assassins and a ton of factions, and the Malazan Empire thinks that they should be able to take over whoever they want to take over, and other people are like, hello, you can't take us over. So that's pretty much it. That's what happens in the book. And so I am going on to the next book in the series, and I'm ready to find out what else is going on and add to my giant list of characters that I already have running around inside my brain. So that leads us to Best Served Cold. This is the fourth book that I've read by Joe Abercrombie, and I read the trilogy, the First Law trilogy, and then this is supposed to be a standalone book that also happens in the same world. And while they're listed, the next three books are listed as standalone books, because they're not about the same characters, they're still told in a chronological order of the world. So like kings are still doing things, there's still political espionage happening, and things like that are happening. So I still think they need to be read in the certain order so that you don't get mixed up about what happens where and when and all of that stuff. So I talk about those a lot more in the fantasy challenge, but Best Served Cold needs to be read fourth before you read Heroes and Red Country, just so you know what's happening in the bigger world in chronological order. Now, Best Served Cold features Shivers, who we met in the trilogy. And so nobody else from the trilogy is really in the story. We do hear about other people from the trilogy, but this one is mostly revolving around Shivers. And I loved him, but outside of him, I didn't like a lot of stuff about this book. This is probably my least favorite book so far from Abercrombie, and I'm going to continue for sure. I'm reading Heroes, I'm reading Red Country, and I'm going to read the short story collection. I'm going to keep going because I love this world. He drew me in with the very first book and the trilogy, and I'm hooked. So I will continue, but this was probably my least favorite so far. Then we have the author catalog books, and we have Wild Magic by Tamara Pierce and The Last Final Girl by Stephen Graham Jones. I read both of these, and they both do have their own videos that will be coming up. But Wild Magic, I will say, it introduced us to a whole new group of characters in the same world that Alana established. So we see Alana now as an adult, we see John as an adult, and George, and everybody's all grown up. And this book centers around Dane, who learns that she has a certain kind of magic that might not be the regular kind of magic. And that's what this is about. And I've already read the first two books. This one is Wild Magic, and the next one is Wolf Speaker, which I've already read. And it just continues with Dane. Wolf Speaker actually is my least favorite book in the series, and I definitely talk about that a lot more in the author catalog video that will be coming out. Then The Last Final Girl by Stephen Graham Jones. This is the last one on this list, so I read it and I loved it so much. It is told like a movie. It's told like you are, I don't even know how to describe it. You're on the phone with somebody maybe who is telling you the movie that they're watching. So I don't know. It was very cool. It starts with like the video pans out and you see this thing happening. Like it's just really cool how it's told. You get different perspectives, meaning different camera angles. You're sometimes behind the eyes of the killer. You're sometimes looking down from underneath and you can see up. Like he just describes where the camera is and what you can see based on the camera angle. So it's like watching a movie with your ears. And of course, it's a slasher movie, The Last Final Girl, right? So they're all about final girls. And it was just really good, and I really liked it. And I've not read an extra one of his. So that is all. I'm going to go back out. So I have 9 books left. I'm not going to count the Neverending Story just because, like I said, I feel like that book is going to just continue to carry on. So I have 9 books left, and it's the middle of the month. So I do not think that will be a problem at all. The only one that might be is that Long Overdue at the Lakeside Library, since I'm not loving it, but we'll see. I don't want to DNF a NetGalley book, but if this had been just a book that I had picked to read, I would be DNFing it. But because it's a NetGalley book, I don't really want to do that. I want to give it a shot and then just tell them why I think there's a problem. Why I think there's a problem with it. So that is my mid-month wrap-up. I am looking forward to the next things that I'm going to be reading, those last 9 books. And so I'll be doing an end-of-the-month wrap-up with everything that I've read from now to the end of the month. So I look forward to seeing you there, and I will see you in my next video. And Django says bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.